Something historic just happened on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and the unprecedented effects of that very item alone will carry far-reaching implications. Get ready, folks, because we're watching Bible prophecy beginning to form in front of our very eyes. All right, folks, this one is an exciting one, and dare I say, historic and unprecedented. And although we have gone over lots of stories like this, every single time we go over another one, it seems to cross over a new barrier. It changes something. And folks, this one is incredible. This is actually a far-reaching effect of President Trump being inaugurated into office. And what we're seeing happening in Israel right now is remarkable because there is a new sense of freedom that is being built up even amongst Jews to be able to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's why this stuff is so incredibly interesting to watch. Now, this affects the Temple Mount, and what we are seeing here, as I said before, is remarkable. Now, I want to just immediately start off by telling you that when we think about the Temple Mount, it's an important discussion to have, because although we do not see a temple on the Temple Mount right now, we know that the temple is a huge part of Bible prophecy. We know that the end times events that we read about in Bible prophecy happen with the inclusion of the nation of Israel, which we actually saw being repatriated in 1948, which was absolutely a powerful sign that we are rapidly approaching the last days. But it also involves the construction and the use of the temple in the Temple Mount. And we are seeing signs again and again and again and again that appear to be quickly manifesting. And it seems as though we've gone down this slope where the speed is picking up and the remarkable effects of all that's happening is unbelievable. So let's get into this story and we'll talk about it. Because listen, folks, look, when we talk about the construction of the temple, at least the one that we are dealing with in the time of the tribulation, that's not a temple that we're supposed to be super happy about. Now, we're happy in the sense that when we see the construction of that temple, we know that that is a sign that our end is near. And when I say our end, what I really mean is our beginning into eternity, and it's going to be an incredible eternity. We are in a place where we have so much to look forward to because the goodness of God overwhelms us, and we are the recipients of these amazing rewards that God has put in front of us as a result of putting our faith and trust in the finished work of his son, in his son. And so there's so many cool things that we are the recipients of, that we are the inheritors of. And so when we look at the building of this temple or the rebuilding of this temple, it's exciting because it is yet another super sign that we are getting very, very close to the end. By the way, the reason why I say this is because we know that the temple is an integral part of what the Bible says has to happen. As a matter of fact, the very first sign that Jesus tells us to look forward to as being the sign that shows us what generation will see the second coming of Jesus, not to be conflated with the rapture, we will be raptured by the time this first sign manifests, is when the Antichrist sets himself up in this temple and demands to be worshiped. Now, that's a very important thing because, again, as I said before, we should be happy because we know what's coming next, but we're not so happy because we know that this temple is being built, in essence, for the Antichrist. And that's the part that a lot of people don't necessarily see, especially if you're a Jew. But fortunately, at one point, you will see it. And God will save a whole conglomerate of Jews, but not without tremendous loss of Jewish life. And that's the part that bothers me. So that's why we preach the gospel. That's why we talk about Bible prophecy. That's why we talk about all these things that we learn from the ancient prophets, the things that we learn from God himself, who uses the ancient prophets to communicate to us, knowing his word, understanding what's next. It's really, really important. So let me read the title here. The title says, Historic Prayer Service at Temple Mount heralds hopes for a new era of religious freedom under Trump. Now, Trump is undoubtedly the center of this in a way, okay? And it's so amazing because sometimes God will use these world rulers and these world leaders don't even know that God is using them like a pawn. And it's so funny to see that happening, although I will say I'm very thankful for the fact that President Trump recognizes that God is using him, and I think he's looking for more opportunities to make himself available that the mighty hand of God may continue to grow the nation that he is seeking to build and the one that he is seeking to make great again. And so I think there's some really important aspects to this that we should really be thankful to the Lord for, especially for those of us that are American citizens. But let's read through this article because it is strikingly interesting and very important, dare I say. Look what it says. It says, in a powerful display of religious unity and determination, Jewish and Christian worshipers made history Monday by holding an unprecedented prayer service at Judaism's holiest site, the Temple Mount, celebrated Donald Trump and praying for his successful return to the presidency. The groundbreaking gathering directly challenged the discriminatory status quo that has long prevented Jews from freely worshiping at their most sacred site. And folks, that's absolutely true. And you have to understand the Jordanian Waqf has a lot to do with this. And it's interesting because even when you consider the existence of the Jordanian Waqf, it brings out so many other issues that we have to talk about. But what's remarkable is when you begin to see these prayer meetings escalate in number, and you begin to see them organize in greater numbers, when you begin to see them become more grand, it is a sign that we are getting one step closer to what I believe becomes the nominalization of this Islamic site being holy to Islam and really becoming a transformation to the site becoming more and more useful and holy to the Jews and, dare I even say, some Christians. So this is really important to think this through because it looks like God is beginning to change the hearts of a lot of people. Now we'll get into the next paragraph and I'll explain why this becomes really, really important here. Look what it says in this paragraph. It says, despite the Jordanian Waqf continuing to impose restrictions on Jewish prayer at the Temple Mount, courageous religious leaders and their followers demonstrated that the right to prayer cannot be denied. The service organized by Rabbi Tuli Weiss of Israel 365 marked a significant step forward in the fight for religious freedom in Jerusalem. By the way, it's amazing that there has to be a fight for religious freedom in Jerusalem. Now, it's interesting because I'm reading an article from Israel 365, and to see a rabbi associated with Israel 365 go and do this is pretty remarkable. It is definitely groundbreaking. It is something worthy of a lot of attention and a lot of news because of where we know this is going. And folks, I want to stop for one moment and talk about the Jordanian Waqf because this is a very, very important issue to discuss, even if for a moment. And it centers around the idea that Saudi Arabia is making a very public stance regarding its opinion on who should take over the guardianship of the Temple Mount. As a matter of fact, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is making it very, very clear that he believes it should be the responsibility of Saudi Arabia to manage this area of the Temple Mount. And I specifically believe that the reason why he wants to do it is because he wants to shelf the Temple Mount as being a significant site to Islam because he wants to place all attention on Mecca. And I think, folks, that he recognizes the story of the Kaaba and where it actually came from goes back to Jerusalem, and he doesn't want attention on that specific story. As a matter of fact, I believe that MBS understands that if he minimizes the value of the Temple Mount to the Islamic world, then it will greatly increase the value of Saudi Arabia and Mecca specifically for Islamic worshipers. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to bring all eyes on Mecca because he wants to continue to improve Saudi Arabia's standing on the world front, specifically in the arena of not just economics, but also the religious world, on the area of leadership on many other fronts. And the only way that he can do that is to turn a certain remarked level of adversity as it relates to a series of different areas, whether it be in the cultural arts, whether it be things like music or, any other type of things, recreational activities, sporting events, so on and so forth. He wants to make Saudi Arabia the very center and the very focus of the whole world, especially as it relates to the Middle East. And naturally, the belief is, if you look at the Arabian Peninsula, it is the best place to do it, especially because it's situated between the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. It can serve as a remarkable land bridge to facilitate trade routes that can very much cause mutual benefit with all the nations involved, and it serves as a remarkable open door to create a radical amount of riches within Saudi Arabia, the likes that they have not seen historically. Remember, as I said before, MBS is running towards the G7, and that is important. Understanding and recognizing what he wants there will, of course, bring it one step closer, Saudi Arabia one step closer, to putting into effect the very thing that I think needs to happen in order for there to be an amicable and viable agreement for the reconstruction of the Jewish temple. And I think we're moving in that direction, and we're seeing this happening again and again and again. And folks, I'm going to tell you this right now. I think normalization with Israel is right around the corner. And I think that there is an incentivization mechanism that can be created within the Temple Mount to put into effect a very solid normalization plan, which would involve making the religious right in Israel extraordinarily happy. And when I say religious right, I use that term because I want you to understand who the right actually is in Israel. When we say the right in Israel, it's very different from what we say is the right in the United States of America. And I think that's a really, really important distinction to be made. But this could be something that could be mutually beneficial for a series of people that exist within Israel, outside of Israel, and of course the rest of the Islamic world if Saudi Arabia has their way. So this is all really important stuff and something that we really need to be paying attention to. Now let's look at this quote. This is interesting. This is from the rabbi, and he says this. He says, "On this day that represents new beginnings, we turned to our Father in heaven, the God of Israel, in unity and prayer." He goes on to say, "Here at the seat of his heavenly throne, Jews and Christians gather together to pray for the success of Donald Trump in his second term." And it's interesting because, yes, they're going there to pray for Donald Trump, but I think they're using Donald Trump as a tool to make a specific way by which they can sort of open a door to be able to get to the next level. This is a functional pushing of the Overton window. And the more it gets pushed, the easier it's going to be for them to accomplish their ultimate purpose, which is building the temple. And that's where they want to go. That's exactly where they want to go. Look at what it goes on to say. It says, "The service highlighted Trump's unmatched record of support for Israel, including his bold recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital." John Anderson, founder of Cry for Zion, praised Trump's courage in standing with Israel. He says this in his quote. He says, "We want to pray and thank God for President Trump, who was willing to think differently and recognize the reality that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel." These people love President Trump, and they love him for a very, very good reason. And I believe that God is going to bless President Trump because of his support for Israel. And that's good for those of us that are living in America and care about our great republic. Look what it goes on to say. It says, "Yesterday's afternoon prayer service, called Mincha in Hebrew, was led by Israeli singer Yair Levy," which, by the way, if you've ever heard him sing, he is such a fantastic singer. He's got, just very, very talented. "And brought together a diverse group of worshipers, including members of the Belz Hasidic community, demonstrating the broad support for both Trump and religious freedom at the Temple Mount. Rabbi Yehuda Glick, a longtime advocate for Temple Mount prayer rights, offered a stirring prayer for Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, asking that they become faithful messengers of God's purposes." And I think you could make a reasonable argument that they have become faithful messengers of God's purposes. Look at Glick's proclamation, folks, as this article refers to it as a hope, or the expression of hope, for continued progress under Trump's leadership. Look what it says. "We acknowledge with gratitude the bold declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a beacon of faith for believers worldwide." That's heavy. Continues to say, "The gathering receives strong support from Christian leaders as well. Reverend Peter Fass, international CEO of Bridges for Peace, defended the right of both Jews and Christians to pray at the Temple Mount, emphasizing its, quote, historic, ongoing biblical right and significance to Israel and the Jewish people worldwide." Here's his quote. "Bridges for Peace believes wholeheartedly in the historic, ongoing biblical right and significance of Har Habiyat," which is referring to the Temple Mount, Har meaning mountain. Okay, so just good to reference, "to the state of Israel and the Jewish community worldwide. In recent months, Israel 365 has taken a stronger role in advocating for critical issues facing Israel in light of the war. The organization started Israel 365 Action to run a party in the upcoming World Zionist Congress elections in order to help shape the Zionist movement going forward. It's just interesting when you think about that. Like, you think about the levels and the extent that they are going to see this happening, and you just can't help but to just go, wow, this is the Bible coming to life in many ways. And although we're not seeing the temple being rebuilt right now, we know that that's where it's going to go. We know that's where the natural progression is going to be, and it's remarkable. Look what it goes on to say. It says, as Israel faces continued challenges, including the current war, that enemies have teamed the Al-Aqsa flood, Rabbi Weiss emphasized the critical importance of asserting Jewish rights at the Temple Mount. And he's right. He's right to do that. Look at his quote. He says, all of those who believe in the Bible must respond by doubling down on our efforts to embrace Habiyat, the Temple Mount. The article says here he's declaring this, expressing hope that under Trump's future administration, Israeli sovereignty would extend throughout the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. He's referring to the West Bank when he says Judea and Samaria. And of course, we don't ever use the term the West Bank. We like to use the term Judea and Samaria. There's an important reason why we do that. Look what it goes on to say, and this is his quote here. He says, with God's help over the next 4 years during the Trump administration, we pray that Israeli sovereignty will extend over our entire biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, starting from the heart of the heart, Har Habyat. Success of the historic prayer service, despite the Waqf's long-standing restrictions on Jews and Christians, demonstrates that positive change is possible with strong leadership and unwavering determination. As more Jews and Christians unite in support of prayer rights at the Temple Mount, and with the prospect of stronger support for Israel with Trump's return to office, the dream of true religious freedom at Judaism's holiest site appears closer than ever to becoming reality. And folks, when he says closer than ever to becoming reality, let me just explain what he means by that. He's talking about the temple. He's talking about the rebuilding of the temple. And I think that this is something we all have to pay attention to. When you start to see this type of window being pushed, when you begin to see people beginning to make more and more and more and more of a deal concerning this issue, then you are literally watching the manifestation. It's happening right before your eyes of the doors opening in order to take the next step. And the next step is the rebuilding of the temple. And folks, I'm telling you this right now. These people have everything they need in order to rebuild the temple. I'm not kidding you. I want to show you this picture. This picture is remarkable. And I want you to see this, because in this picture, it's astounding. You can't help but to be astounded by it. I'm going to actually switch the screen here. Take a look at this. What you're seeing right here is a site that they found in Jerusalem. This is an ancient quarry. Now, the reason why this quarry is really important for you to know and be aware of is because this quarry officially filled a gap of knowledge that was lacking in people seeking to reinstitute the building of the temple. Why is that the case? Let me explain why. Because when you look at this picture, this quarry right here actually shows the stones that were made for the temple in every stage as they were being developed. It shows the stones in the early stages. It shows the stones in the completed stages. It shows the stones in middle stages. And the reason why this is really, really critical is because it gives very deep insight to the people who are interested in rebuilding the temple as into how to form the stones, or to quarry out the stones, carve out the stones necessary to build it. Now there are engineers, because they have this information, that are going through and figuring out and learning how it all works so that they can take things one step further. Don't get me started on the Temple Institute and all the work that they've done. Don't get me started on the red heifers and the fact that they still have 3 viable red heifers. I guess one of the fourth one, which was very viable for a long time, manifested a hair that made it not usable. But the reality of it is they've got 3 very usable, kosher red heifers for the purpose of the dedication of the rebuilding of the temple. So you look at all of this stuff, you begin to put it together, and you realize that times are changing. Things are changing. The world is changing. And folks, Christ could come back at any moment. This stuff should get us excited. This stuff should get us to think about things that are happening in our future that are so encouraging. So there you have it, folks. Pay attention to this stuff. Study the scriptures. Know what the Bible says about it. Good places to go to for information on the temples of the future would be Ezekiel, of course, and of course what you read about in the book of Revelation. There's so much good insight there. And of course, Daniel. Daniel touches up on this as well, especially when we get into Daniel chapter 9. There's so much that's there. And there's a lot of very deep insight that you can pull from these prophetic visions, dreams, words, utterances being given by the ancient prophets. And they are critical. They're super important for our learning, especially as we seek to relate to the things that we know are coming in the future. So this is exciting stuff, folks. You should get ready. It's encouraging. Christ can come back at any moment. We've got a lot to live for. And this life is exciting, but the life to come is even more exciting. God bless you guys.